in AR and mixed reality, to support the surgeon to be more precise, to be able to navigate successfully, and perhaps even take a cancer out with good margins. Haptics are coming in. We know, of course, we need haptics. Sorry, go back 1 second. Haptics, the feel, the touch. And that will often arise very quickly in that metaverse. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Sorry, thank you. So haptics is coming in, and we'll also see how we can use haptics and the touch within the VR space. At Barcelona Medical School, where I'm Associate Dean, I taught my students the metaverse. I'm now teaching them regularly in that environment in the future. This was during the pandemic, using HoloLens to teach my students remotely on invisible wall rounds. What's happened is that sometimes with this staple line by the pancreas, you get leaking of fluid, pancreatic fluid, and that's what you're seeing on the drain. And the drain comes. Last couple of slides. So we saw earlier, I've been spending a decade thinking about technologies, innovation, immersive tech. This is my book. It's called Virtual, and I'm releasing it as an NFT, one of the very first books as an NFT in the world in terms of immersive tech. So you can't buy it online. You have to go to that scan me document. If you scan that, take it to our website, then it'll be an auction in March. 5 copies of my experiences and knowledge for 10 years in this space. But I want to push the boundaries. I don't want a paper copy. I want something different. If it's virtual, let's do an NFT. Let's see what the market's like. In the future, you'll be buying NFT paintings, NFT books. It's a marketplace. And data, of course, for patients. So if you're interested in seeing my work for 10 years, my personal story and journey, you'll see it on that virtual space. So please do scan it and join me. If you want a copy, please get in touch through the website. And you'll be one of only 5 people to have the world's first NFT book out on the market. Dubai is amazing. I've been here so many times, and I was really lucky to be at the Museum of the Future yesterday. I took this picture from one of the views from Museum of the Future. If you haven't been, you should go. It's truly amazing. Dubai is the future. It really supports people thinking with big ideas, bringing new concepts to this Middle East. You know what? I looked at that and thought, you know what? The metaverse, the technology, the innovation we described, lends itself well to a place like Dubai. Hopefully we can work together. Please reach out to me if you want to think about that future. We're happy to collaborate with people, universities, colleges, medical schools, and hospitals to build the metaverse together and also to teach our students in the metaversity. Thank you very much.
You don't have the knowledge or the experience to succeed. You can't make money posting TikToks. You have to go to university to get a good job. This is what Generation Z have been told to believe. This is what I have been told to believe. I'm Jake Oz, I'm 16 years old, I'm a social entrepreneur from London, England, and today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about young entrepreneurship and social change. So, to start off, I'd like to talk a bit about my journey, how it went from a show and tell. The first important thing to say is that nobody sets out to become an entrepreneur. You simply set out to solve an idea or develop on a problem or fill a gap in the market. All you do is you ideate, you develop on that idea, and it's important to say that you have to stay nimble and be able to pivot and change your idea and develop and hone and shape your idea to the current landscape. You have to be prepared to pivot in order to improve. An example of this would be someone like Brent Francis, the current CEO and founder of Gymshark, created 10 different apps and websites before he stumbled across Gymshark. So, in my case, in 2013, I did a school assembly trying to solve a problem. There was no websites for young people to access for what's cool to do in London. So in 2013, I did a show and tell about that very website. It was a website called iCoolKid. Then, 6 years later, we decided, after hiring and firing 3 different website companies, that we were going to build this website after my show and tell. And we hired our first employee. Now this is lesson 1. We hired our first employee, who at the time was actually my guitar teacher. And the important thing there is that you should Consider offering sweat equity and don't underplay your idea just because you think it's not good enough. Hire someone of good value who's going to help you drive forward your idea. Then just a year later, we launched the I Call Good website. It's important to note that after I launched the website, I had people in my generation, Generation Z, starting to reach out to me, talking about their very kind of deep moral dilemmas. Examples of this would be young girls who had to use rubbish as female sanitary products, or people who couldn't get clean water in their schools. Things that I was completely naively unaware of, but these were the plights of the people who I was meant to be representing. So, in 2019, we realized that change needed to happen. I had my pivot point, and that changed in 4 main ways. The first thing we did was we renamed I Call Good to Thread. I was no longer a kid, the word cool wasn't that cool, and all we had left was I, so I figured something needed to change. We refocused the website, so instead of being about cool things to do in London, it was now going to be about social change, and 100% of it was social change. We then repositioned the demographic. Instead of being 8 to 15-year-olds, we now target ourselves at 16 to 25-year-olds. And finally, we restructured, and we started to include the consulting branch as well, but I'll get to that in just a second. In 2020, we launched Thread.com, and here we are 18 months later. I want to talk a bit about Thread Media now. Thread Media, at the heart of it, is a social enterprise which focuses on publishing, media, consulting, and production work, all of which is aimed at Generation Z. From our founder, to our editors, our publishing, to our consulting, we are Generation Z at the heart of our website. The idea with Thread is to enact global change, but we believe that global change doesn't come from one person or one speaker, but it comes from lots of local leaders making local impact on a global scale. So, the idea is to inform, inspire, and impact the most amount of like-minded people possible to enact local change on a global scale. Thread works on 3 main branches, the first of which is the publishing website, Thread.com, which is a 100% social change-focused website. The content spans all the way from online education, which would be examples of fundraising or raising awareness or anything you can do from your computer, all the way through to offline activism, which is the protests, the strikes, and then eventually the change at the governmental level. We're in 17 different languages with visitors from 190 different countries. Now, it's also important to notice that these countries are the classics. You have the UK and the US as the top 2, but because we're in 17 different languages, we also have Japan, Netherlands, Germany, India, all the way through to Samoa, Nicaragua, Fiji, Gabon, and Tonga, all of which have somehow managed to stumble their way across Thread. The second pillar of Thread is the Thread community. We have 200,000 followers across our social media channels, and the idea behind that is we want to find the most amount of planet-positive, community-driven people, and we call them the Changemaker Network. Now that could be people who are our remote writers across the world, could be our Discord moderators, could be our interns or our ambassadors, but it's like-minded people who are part of the Thread community who want to make a change. We also have a Discord channel called Social Exchange, and the idea behind that is where we're going to try and cooperate 20 NGOs of different successes in order to put them in contact with people of like-minded people in order to make the most change possible. The final pillar of Thread is the Thread consulting. Now, because we're such a Generation Z-driven brand, we have 2 unique aspects. We have our social change aspect and our young person aspect. So we consult on both of those areas. We help brands gain share of mind and hence share of wallet with Generation Z, crucially. We give them real-time insights from influencers, activists, and entrepreneurs who we all have a connection with. Finally, we also give them the research, the polling, and the future casting trends in order so they can understand better Generation Z. Quite often, these older companies will really struggle to permeate the barrier to Generation Z, and it's not allowing them to be successful, especially given that Generation Z make up 40% of the consumer base currently. Here are some of the companies we've worked with. Just to clarify, Dunkin' and Epic are Dunkin' Donuts and Epic Games. I just couldn't fit it. Now I want to talk a little bit about youth employment and entrepreneurship. Especially for the young people in the crowd, this is tremendously important. I feel like nowadays the tough environment is really a function of the overall changing job landscape. And it's been made a lot worse by COVID, no doubt. But the wheels of change were already in motion long before the pandemic. Entire industries are on track for replacement by AI and automation by 2030, and that is not a fact lost on Generation Z. Furthermore, 800 million jobs will be lost globally to both AI and automation. It's also worth saying that the gig workforce is growing at 3 times faster than the traditional workforce, and by 2027, 50% of developing countries and developed countries will have a gig economy workforce. Therefore, you can expect a massive growing emphasis on self-employment and demand-based work. Job security, health benefits, and paid vacations are all things that traditionally we would have taken for advantage, but we simply can't do that anymore. These are 3 big unexpected risks which the previous generation haven't thought of as a risk. We haven't been trained for the level of hustle which is necessary to survive. Raj Chetty, from the Harvard and Stanford professor, coined a term called lost Einsteins. The idea here is that the education industry isn't doing a good enough job with ideators and developers. It's very easy to spot an athlete, or a musician, or a performer, or an academic very early on in their life, so you can give them the coaching and training necessary to succeed. But it's very hard to see an ideator, or an entrepreneur, or a developer very early on in their life. So these ideators are left to formulate and develop their ideas in relative silence with very little help or training. And we're losing these Einsteins, hence the term lost Einsteins. They need to teach us to think like moonshotters. And just to clarify, moonshotters are the people with the biggest ideas. 85% of the jobs needed for 2030's economy haven't been created at scale yet. And where are these jobs going to come from? Well, they're coming from 2 main sectors. The first thing being the tech sector, no surprise there. Jobs in big data, artificial intelligence, robotics, smart meters, fighting cybercrime, fixing autonomous vehicles. I can't imagine that the mechanic down the road who used to work in your grandparents' car is the same person who's going to fix your self-driving car 20 years from now. And we need to educate that person. The second sector, and again no surprise here, is the social change sector. Jobs like aquaponic fish farmers, rewilders, and garbage designers are all things which we haven't been trained in, but are going to be necessary for the next economy. So, the next generation of entrepreneurs need to build the companies and services needed for the new world just 10 years from now. I want to say that young entrepreneurs, lots of the time Generation Z have been described as kind of all young entrepreneurs, but actually that's not the case. We're much more practical pragmatists and solopreneurs. It's much less of a reach for the riches as it is just a sustainable, win-based job. Now, I want to tell you why there's absolutely no better time to get started in the world of young entrepreneurship than today. With factors such as cloud computing, website building apps, and distributed networks, it has never been cheaper to start a website. In fact, the cost of failure is now 1/10 what it was just 10 years ago. Which in other words, means that you can start and fail 10 different websites for the same cost as failing one just 10 years ago. The key is to start, fail, redirect, repeat. You don't need to get it right the first time. You just need to keep on trying. Another factor as to why it's so good to get started now is the democratization of education, best than it's ever been. The biggest educator on the planet is called YouTube. If you can type it and search it, you can learn it. How-to videos are continually the most watched genre of any YouTube video. Upskilling and repotting your careers and your knowledge has never been easier, cheaper, or more convenient. Furthermore, digital learning apps such as Skillshare, Masterclass, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy are all very widely available to lots of Generation Zers, meaning that you can further develop your knowledge in any career area while at a job which you may want to leave or while still at school. Next, community building support programs are absolutely key to harness for Generation Z. You need to take advantage of them. The private sector is supplying critical, non-syllabus focused content. Look, there's examples of pitch competitions, webinars, conferences, targeted grants, training, scholarships, Olympiads, which all allow Generation Z to have a better advantage at being successful. Finally, skill swapping and resources. I want to talk about non-transactional conversations. Now, to explain what a non-transactional conversation is, I think it's first important to say what a transactional conversation is. A transactional conversation is when you email or message or DM someone in order to gain an internship or a job or something tangible. A non-transactional conversation, hence, is something where a conversation which you have with an industry leader or an expert where you're not asking for anything. All you're doing is drawing out an opinion or starting a conversation or forming a closer bond or relationship with that person, or simply just getting your voice heard. So, where do these non-transactional conversations take place? Well, the fastest place they're taking it is LinkedIn. It's the fastest growing cohort of Generation Z is on LinkedIn, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. You should also consider joining private servers where you can find like-minded people. Places like Discord, Reddit, and IRL are all great examples where you can find these micro-communities of like-minded people. But I'm going to get on to that in a second. Look, it's important to know that there are seismic shifts happening in the digital environment, and as Generation Z, we need to keep up. Now, let's dig a little bit into digital campfires, because the decentralization is fueling their really rapid growth. Even before the pandemic, Generation Z was experimenting with these smaller, interest-led online platforms. But throughout the pandemic, they surged in Generation Z, and they moved away from these public-facing titans of social media like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and moved towards these smaller digital campfires. Like I said, the Reddits, the Discords of the world. Digital campfires now have become a mainstay for Generation Z. And here are the 3 reasons why. The first is the fact that you're able to private message and connect with these select micro-communities. It's a smaller and more intimate feeling which leads to stronger connections with these people. You can participate in shared experiences and shared culture-shifting movements. We all know that there's no culture-shifting movement happening on Instagram, or Twitter, or TikTok. But there are culture-shifting movements happening on Reddit and Discord and IRL and Clubhouse. Finally, it's not meant to replace a public social presence on Instagram or Facebook, but rather complement it. You're meant to connect, experience, and share these culture-shifting movements on these small platforms. It's also important to note that the conversations on these small platforms are much more tangible, much more meaningful. They're at a higher frequency and a higher touch. No one really concentrates when they're looking through Instagram or DMing someone, but you do concentrate when you're having a conversation on Reddit. The 3 main categories of the digital campfires are shown there. The first being the messaging campfires, the WhatsApps, Telegrams, Signals, Snapchat. The second being the community-based campfires. Most of these I mentioned before. And finally, the experiential campfires, such as Fortnite and Roblox. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the growing intersectionality between creativity and solopreneurship. It combines the 2 areas which we just covered. In the past 24 months, no cohort has seized the opportunity to reinvent themselves quite in the same way that Generation Z has. Out of 50 million people in the creator economy nowadays, 3 million of which we would consider professionals. Now, Generation Z went into overdrive during the pandemic because we had more time and we had less responsibilities, which meant that we were able to discover, experiment, and commit to developing the passions which we used to have. With this combination of apps for everything, like editing videos and dropping merchandise to recording podcasts, it meant that everyone was able to rekindle their passions because they all of a sudden had a lot of time at home. Now, they have all been democratized the chance to be seen and heard. Now, it's important to keep in mind that creators rarely receive compensation for most of their content. They simply use likes and a growing follower count as a means to get other ventures. Now, all of that is changing as the creator revolt against mega platforms takes the center stage. They realize that their output can command a direct price, so creators now want a slice of that $100 billion in market revenue. Otherwise, they'll move to upstarts to allow them to capture value for themselves. Things like Substack, Medium, OnlyFans, Roblox, Twitch, and Snapchat. Now, onto the major changes to the marketplace. The first is, as I mentioned before, this explosion of innovative software that allows creators to be successful. Things like project management apps, fan monetization apps, subscription model apps, all allowing these young creators to do better. Then we have the launch of these new, smaller platforms that offer shared experiences and a shared revenue stream that is deemed fair and equitable, much more so than the titans of social media previously. It's also important to note that there has been a huge wake-up call for these mega platforms as we begin to pay creators or face the consequences of not. I think it's important to say that a startup is an organization that scales, and a creator is an individual that scales. It's the same DNA. Now, I realize that everything around us seems very chaotic right now, so why should we feel lucky to be a part of Generation Z? It's important to say that we've been shaped by four main things: smartphones, a decade of social activism, a prolonged financial crisis, and now a global, viral, highly infectious pandemic. As a generation, we are researchers and fact-checkers. With Google at our fingertips, why wouldn't we be? We're competitive, but we're not afraid of failure. We are the generation that will stand up and keep on trying, and keep on doing it again and again and again until we see success. We're focused on the financial consequences, and we're much more fiscally aware than any other generation has been, probably a direct consequence of the financial crisis, which either we or our parents had to live through. The example I like to use with this is, as a generation, we're more likely to buy one t-shirt for £60 instead of 10 t-shirts for £6, because we understand the value of things, we understand how to resell and to repot. Our meat, car and travel purchases are massively on the decline. Admittedly, this was definitely accelerated by COVID, but the wheels were in motion long before the pandemic. Activism really forms a part of Generation Z's identity. The moral compass that drives our decision making has a huge impact on the consumer world. On an economic level, we have $7 trillion worth of income, and that only increases as the rest of us enter the workplace. We, by 2030, will overtake millennials as the most economically powerful generation there has ever been. The increase by 140% over the next 5 years, all the way up to 33 trillion by 2030. The US and China have the most economic power when it comes to Generation Z, quickly followed by India, Japan, Germany, and then the UK. Now, if you want to start a company, it's important to really understand where your future companies, where your future customers are going to be coming from. Out of 7.6 billion people in the world, 2.5 billion of them are Generation Z, making us the biggest cohort today. Just under 90% of Generation Z live in developing and emerging countries, hence the need for Thread to be in 17 different languages. 44% of Generation Z just live in 5 different countries. That's India, China, Nigeria, Indonesia, and the US. India alone has a fifth of Generation Zers, and China behind has just under 15%. India is really important to know because as a future company, as a future entrepreneur, you want to really understand the 3 main factors which drive a consumer and enable a consumer. And that is literacy rates, urbanization, and technological infrastructure and connectivity. All 3 of those factors are massively prominent in India, soon followed by Mexico, Philippines, and Thailand. Now, if you want to start a business, you need to really be a future caster these days. The transformational forces at play right now are more impactful and more important than they ever have been, especially to future entrepreneurs. The first one is consumption has been completely redefined. We are much more risk-averse and sustainably minded cohort than any other generation traditionally has been. We're a more pragmatic generation of consumers. Generation Z analyse not only what they are buying, but the very act of buying it. For Generation Z, consumption means having access to products, not necessarily owning them. I'm going to repeat that. Consumption is having access to products, not necessarily owning them. As access becomes the new consumption, unlimited, pardon me, as access becomes the new consumption, this means that Generation Z are going to have an unlimited access to goods and services, such as car riding services. I mean, think about it. You can sell a car once, but you can rent a car thousands of times. Products now become services, and services connect consumers. Well, why is this important for Generation Z? Well, because less is more when it comes to sustainability. So, why buy when you can rent and share? The second transformational force is consumption as an expression of singularity, meaning that consumption is an expression of one's identity. At the core of Generation Z is this idea of manifesting and really finding our identity and becoming ourselves. So how are we going to do that? Well, we consume through, and the consumption is a means of becoming ourselves. Consumption becomes a means of self-expression as opposed to buying or wearing brands that fit in with the social norms of your friends. Because gone are the days where groups and groups of people will all look the same, dress the same, and listen to the same music. Because that just doesn't happen anymore. We want to find ourselves and our own identity. Finally, the consumption anchored on ethics and sustainability.